Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe.
I'm Glenn Cerny, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this, our 11th season of Your Legislators, a program that's designed to allow the legislators from southwestern New Mexico to talk to you about happenings and activities in Santa Fe during the session. And I'm very pleased to welcome once again to our inaugural show Senator John Arthur Smith from Deming, and I'm trying to remember, is this the third or fourth year we've done this at this point together?
We did it 1 year when the state had money, 3 years with when we were a bit poor.
And in fact, I'm sitting here and I wrote in my notes, it's kind of like when we get together, we talk about the sessions of past, the sessions of present, and the sessions of future. And it doesn't same. And as when I greeted you, I says, can we go the whole half hour without talking about the budget?
And I said there's not much to talk about there, but it's all going to turn on the budget.
Well, let's see if we can kind of walk through some of what you expect to see in the coming session that will start in about a week and a half. And first of all, the Democrats in the majority in both the Senate and the House again. But some minor changes for the Democrats in the House with a new, or in the Senate with a new speaker.
Well, and the House will have the new speaker. The Senate added 2 additional Democrats, I think, and I'm not certain it's going to change the dynamics of the Senate. When I come back and return from a session, everybody talks to me about, well, that's a tough session. And I said, I can talk and speak on the Senate side. I can't speak on the House side. But when you start seeing bipartisan votes 38-4 consistently in that area, you know that there's an effort to try and work in a bipartisan fashion. And I have to give an awful lot of credit to the minority leader, Senator Stu Engel, on that. But it's not as if we go up there thinking, well, we're going to work on it this time and we haven't in the past. It's a continuous effort by both parties to try and pull together and do what is right and what is best. So when I hear the story that it's been tough, I measured on how many bipartisan votes and what the margin of those votes are on extremely serious issues for the state of New Mexico. If you would happen to see votes that fall along party lines, you know that chamber's not getting along very well. And obviously that's sort of been the history of the House the last few years.
Well, and I think also one of the, I would assume it's an advantage. I have the opportunity to work a little bit with Senator Engel with the station in Portales as well, and I don't mean to insinuate that either of you have been in the chamber for a long, long time, but I often view him very similar to yourself. He's very pragmatic. He's not afraid to call it what it's like, and I would have to believe that you two would have a decent working relationship to work things out if there's issues.
Well, yeah, and we have one thing in common. We do not poll to test the wind before we make a decision. And if it's unpopular, we live with it. If it's popular, so be it. But so much of the public's work is done anymore by polling on what is popular and not necessarily what's financially responsible.
So when we start talking about the budget here, obviously there's going to have to be some compromise, and I think you know just from the presidential election, everybody just wants to see something start moving. Are there different things that you can agree on very quickly to perhaps expedite the process?
Glenn, this is going to be somewhat of a different session for us because we've got to complete work on the 17 budget year that we're in and also do the 18 budget year that starts July 1. We went into special session in September to try and plug the holes where the revenues did not match the expenditures, principally due to oil and gas and gross receipts declining. But we still have some heavy lifting to do on the 17 budget, and here at the university, they've cut their budget in addition to what the state has requested, but the University of Higher Education has taken an 8% cut virtually since January. which is sizable. On about a $900 million, so 8% of that is probably in the 70 range that they've had to cut of state money on that. So as a result, it's obviously been challenging on that, but there's a chance that they're going to have to do some more of that, because the governor and I've disagreed in the past. When we went into regular session, our special session here in September, I said everything has to be on the table, cuts and additional revenues. And the governor said, no, we don't want additional revenues. We'll just take cuts. And so the administration is trying to cut their way to prosperity, and that's a challenge. And I don't think the public realizes how deep of a hole we're in, the pickle that we're in, so to speak, from a financial standpoint. And I think it's going to be starting to hit home.
Well, and we have a distinct advantage here on the campus of New Mexico State University in having someone like Jim Peach on hand, who I think pretty much agrees that really there just isn't any kind of reserves left that you can start to dip into.
Well, that's true. I appreciate Jim Peach, and I appreciate President Carruthers on that, because they really got a head start on it. And I've relied, from an independent third-party view of the economy, I've relied principally on Dr. Peach. He's been very beneficial, and it's helped us raise the flag early, even when I have colleagues in the executive branch that are in denial on the financial situation we're in. But for this input, we would still have an awful lot of people wondering when it's going to happen, and they can tell you right now that it's already happened.
Well, especially when you look at having to do 17 and 18 budgets that much in a row. And again, can you just kind of take us through the process? Because obviously it took a special session to get the 16 settled. Now we're looking here of how long one could normally, under good circumstances, get a budget passed.
Well, on the 16 budget, on the Senate side, we had worked diligently with our staff trying to claw back, cancel programs on that to try and make it work before we ever went in. And we had staff, and we have a wonderful Legislative Finance Committee staff, and we're very, very bright young minds. Many of them are New Mexico State University graduates, I might add, that we rely on, and they make the elected officials look good when they tell us that something needs to be done, and we find out that they were absolutely right. But the bottom line was on 16, due to the decline principally in oil and gas, we found it necessary that we had to go back in and plug some holes. You can't raise taxes on that because that's in arrears, so you've got to find money from every crook and cranny that you possibly can dig it up from to plug that hole in. And one of the fallback positions we have, and I'm often hit with permanent fund discussions, but we completely depleted the tobacco settlement permanent fund. That had about $240 million in it, and we used it to close out 16 budget and then carry forward a 2% reserve, or what we thought was a 2% reserve forward on that one. So that's one of the things that we had to do with the solvency package, and then we had to trim the solvency or the 17 budget even more extensely. We were wanting to trim about closer to $400 million. As it turned out, we trimmed additional $320 million thereabouts. But we find ourselves in a situation with declining revenues still from the oil and gas and the gross receipts around the state, decline, especially in southeast New Mexico and northwest New Mexico, that we still have a shortfall. And as a result, we have no reserves. Lynn, because of our reliance on oil and gas, we have doubled the reserve requirements with that most states don't carry. Most states carry about a 5% reserve. That's the ideal. We've historically carried a 10% reserve because of the volatility of oil and gas. But we have been able to smoke right through that one, quite frankly, and this state has zero reserves.
Well, and it's not something that just happened overnight. I mean, this has been an issue that's kind of been kicked down the road for some time now.
Well, in 2009, there was a couple of the senators, myself included, did see what was coming down the pike, and this state has not recovered from the downturn in the economy in 2008, 2009. But we tried to build reserves at that time, and which we did, and then we had federal money to help bail us out on some of that. And we weathered the storm better than most states, but this state has fewer jobs today than what it had in 2005 when you know, all cylinders were running pretty smooth on the vehicle at the time. And so there's big changes that this state needs to go through, and oil and gas has cautioned both parties, you need to do something different. And at this point in time, we really haven't done anything different.
So what do you, and obviously, I hate to, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this question. There is no low-hanging fruit that you can say, oh, well, we haven't done this, but what are some of the options that are there? I've heard the sin tax possibly. Is there an area that you feel you could get some compromise, and just as important, get the approval of the governor? You know,
I think there's some issues where we can get some compromise on within the legislature. But work still needs to be done in that area to try and raise some revenues to build our reserves on that. But at this point in time, the governor has not agreed to that. And matter of fact, the last conversation I had with her, she was wanting to hit the cash balances of public schools to Band-Aid us on through. Now, the cash balances of public schools ending June of 2016 was about $252 million. As we speak today, the cash balances with public schools, since we're in a new fiscal year, are about $515 million. And historically, they keep about $220 million in cash balances. And then the governor was originally wanting to hit that for about $100 million. Which was fine and dandy, but the issue that we have at hand is those are dollars that have already been appropriated to the public schools. And their justification is that we have to keep high cash balances for various reasons, but one of them is the state keeps tapping us on that. The Las Cruces public schools, ideally 3 to 5% is what we would like to see in balance. And the Las Cruces public schools are pretty much in line with the balance requirements, and so you really couldn't claw much back from them on that. The Deming public schools are pretty much in line with the 5%, and then you have the smaller school systems, Animas and Lordsburg and Tier C. In that area, smaller schools historically keep us higher cash balances, because you got to bring people in to do work if your well goes out or the septic goes out and that sort of thing.
So what you have, I mean, I don't want to refer to it as cannibalization, but you almost start a never-ending cycle here, because everyone agrees that education and a good workforce to develop the economy is important, but you keep kind of whittling away at that ability to have good schools.
Well, the public schools historically, out of every dollar that's appropriated, every taxpayer dollar that's appropriated, about 43 cents out of every dollar goes to public education, and about 15% goes to higher education. So you're looking at somewhere around 57, 58% cents out of every dollar that goes to education, and those are dollars that belong to the public.
You mentioned you've had some discussions with the governor. Do you have any clue, and she'll be giving her speech the first day of the session, of what she's going to identify as priorities?
Well, I'm assuming she's going to stick to her issue of crime and punishment on that. It did not bode well. I think the public fully understood that our biggest problem in September was trying to fund government without any furloughs. And she deferred and postponed that legislative session to make certain it coincided with the election. And as a result, it's more painful to try and fix. But I have no idea what else she wants to work on. I think the 60-day session is obviously one that it's germane, the crime issue. But the irony that we have in the system is we have about a 35% vacancy rate with correction officers. So we can enhance all the penalties in the world, but you may not have anybody to watch them once they're convicted. We've got some district courts that are on the verge of shutting down 1 day a week, especially if they have to encounter additional cut here in January.
Well, and I know up north there's some defense attorneys that are being furloughed off and reduced hours.
You've got a huge problem with public defenders, and we're well aware of that problem, and we've tried to increase the appropriation for public defenders in the last 4 years during the toughest of times. But we've got litigation there that people are claiming that they're being defended with inadequate representation on that, and I think sooner or later the state Supreme Court's going to step in on that one.
You know, you've got to also work. I mean, in addition to the governor, you've got to work with the House. But with the House in the control of the Democrats, I know one of the issues that we heard continually, especially the last year, was the lack of organization, the lack of direction. So do you see that changing and there being a better relationship? But on the other hand, the Senate kind of said we're leaving in the special session, and some felt left the House high and dry there.
Well, I don't know that we led the House out high and dry. You know, the Senate went into special session, and we basically got everything through within about 13 hours. And then we sine-died because we didn't have anything else to do. The House decided that they were going to take up the crime bills, and then they work on the budget later. I'm sure this was at the direction of the executive branch on that, but 7 days later, they finally got something back across. So we gave them plenty of time to try and work something out, but as it turned out, for the most part, they accepted the Senate's work. I think there was about 6 or 7 bills, and with maybe one exception, they changed it. They took 6 out of the 7 and went with that. But the Senate was on the same sheet of music, both Republicans and Democrats, and that was not the case on the House side.
We talk about we've got to move away from the oil and gas revenue. What else can you look at this point?
Well, you know, we've and I've concurred with the governor. We've tried to make our tax structure here in the state more competitive with surrounding states. Oftentimes in our part of the country, they talk about what's going on in Texas. Now they'll say, well, there's no income tax in Texas. And I said, well, we can get rid of income tax. We'll just put it on property tax like they do in Texas. Well, no, let's not do that. So
there's quite a few people in your district that aren't going to be very happy if you do that.
Oh, I know, and there's reasons that, you know, most of your land in Texas and property is privately owned and fee simple land, so to speak, on that. In New Mexico, about 1/3 is privately owned, about 1/3 is tribal, and about 1/3 is federal or state on that one. So you have a different deal. It's one of the reasons that we have much more attractive property tax than what the state of Texas does.
And also, I mean, actually in southern Doña Ana County, the economy's been building quite nicely with Santa Teresa and all the activity down there. So we have been able to see some growth here, but up north, other than I think the call center, I'm not aware of any major kind of industry coming in.
Well, the bright spot in the state of New Mexico has been the Santa Teresa area. I guess one of the triggers was the intermodal in Union Pacific. We offered tax incentives. We did it under the prior administration, and then when Union Pacific wasn't able to do it in that time frame, there was a sunset on that provision. And then this governor reinstituted what former Governor Richardson had already done on that one, and so we concurred with it and extended that, and that's really helped. You can go down to the Santa Teresa area and you can almost feel development, and that's positive.
You know, one of the hot topics nationally has been the legalization of marijuana, and there's been several bills attempted to be put forward in the last couple of years. Is that an area that may be looked at realistically during this session?
Well, I think they will look at it. I think it's going to probably start on the House. There'll be one on the House side and one on the Senate side. That particular bill has not fared well on the Senate side on that for various reasons. Now, the argument will be made with how much money that's being generated, but as other states add to it, the competition sets in and lower prices prevail. And I think Arizona even had a ballot issue on that, and it was voted down. So I still suspect that that issue, in spite of the cry that we're going to get all these wonderful revenues from it, that it probably is going to have a tough road on there. On the Senate side, a lot of the members are saying, you know, let's see what the federal government does. As you well know, here with the Border Patrol, it creates a problem for all the advocates for marijuana around here, because they're going to say it's legal in the state.
You might have an issue driving back from here to Deming.
No, I won't have an issue on marijuana. I won't have an issue on marijuana, but they can get stopped. I mean, right there in the Deming and Lordsburg area, they have close to 600 Border Patrolmen, all part of the El Paso sector, and so I think young people that are advocating for it might have to go through some delays in their travel.
I also seem to remember vaguely that gambling and the lotteries were going to cure our budget woes too at one point, weren't we?
Well, the gaming issue, you're having me really scratch my head. I was co-chair of the Senate committee on gaming. That's before we had Class 3 gaming in the state of New Mexico. And I was always sort of an advocate that you either give gaming to everyone or you take it away from everyone. And the former mayor of Albuquerque, New Mexico said, you know, John, he said, just don't let gaming happen in the city of Albuquerque. And I said, well, don't worry, Marty. I said, gaming's just going to grow, or Albuquerque's just going to grow around it. And that's sort of what's happened on that issue. The lottery is a mature lottery. You can only sell so many tickets. We're generating, with the exception of last year, about somewhere around 37, 38 million for education. And with that, the tuition's gone up, the popularity of the program's certainly been enhanced, and so there's a supplemental to the lottery funding for that, but that is probably going to come to an end also. I think last year the lottery was funded at about 90%. I think in the future you can see that drop to the 70% or 60%, which is still a great deal for a student. Still a great deal, but when you're used to getting 100%, it's no longer a great deal, but there are states that don't even offer that. One of the bargains for our students in this state is the tuition.
Did you see any kind of a positive outcome? I know the insurance premium taxation issue has been front and center lately. Any idea on what may happen with that?
Okay, I sort of categorize everything in either now money or far money. And the dollar amount with the insurance premium that we're talking about, I think that's far money. I think the magnitude of those dollars are so large as far as the payback for that there will be some litigation or potential litigation, and that is not reoccurring. Once they catch up, that's it. If it was reoccurring, it would be much more attractive to me. But for one-time backfill or one-time band-aiding, it would certainly help, but I don't see that money coming in very quickly.
You know, we haven't had a lot of great news here. As you prepare to drive up to Santa Fe and get things kicked off here, is there anything that you're looking at and said, you know, if I could accomplish this, if I could get this to happen, I would be very happy driving back here in March?
Just because I'm happy doesn't mean the people are happy driving back in March. I might have to drive back at night.
But we've talked that this isn't always an easy
Right.
thing, and this is a tough situation.
Right.
I mean, there's no easy answer. We would have been done 20 minutes ago.
My first mission is to rebuild our reserves on that, and we're going to have some new dollars to rebuild reserves. And I'm going to be an advocate for gasoline tax. The gasoline tax that I'm going to be submitting a bill will be a nickel. It'll be a dime increase, but it'll be a nickel for local governments, county and city governments for their road fund. Then there will be a nickel that will be directed toward building reserves, which amounts to about $70 million a year on that nickel. On that, and once the reserves hit 5%, so we're in the 250, 300 million range, then that money will revert to the state road fund on that. And so we're going to be making a run at that, but we've got to have money to rebuild reserves.
Yeah, and again, there's still that issue of two budgets. Sounds like you're certainly going to be busy in the next couple of months.
Well, I've already been practicing saying no to a lot of people that are in denial. Agencies are coming forward.
You wouldn't want to
people are
change that
coming forward.
reputation now, would you?
No, I don't want to put that burden on anyone else on that. But I guess if there's one message I want to communicate, is that I don't think the public fully understands the seriousness of the financial situation we're in. If we do not get an uptick in revenues, you will be seeing additional layoffs. In this area, I mean, through technology, they've already laid off some state police on the communication centers. So it's, and I think there's a good chance you're going to see some 3 or 4 days at schools layoffs if we don't get an uptick.
Like I said, you're going to be busy, and I know you're always busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk to us and kind of set the scene here before we get going, and we certainly will be following you. And as you know, if there's anything we can do, please be sure to call us. And thank you for joining us for this, the first episode of Your Legislators for 2017. As always, we remind you these programs are made possible because of donations from viewers like you. And we look forward to keeping you abreast on what's happening in Santa Fe for the next couple months. Hope you have a good weekend. I'm Glenn Cerny, and we appreciate your taking the time to watch Your Legislators.